Back in the day, I grew up playing video games on an N64 that I received in Christmas of 2000, and because of that fact, there was a 100% guarantee that I would own this game. Anyone who owned an N64 at any time has this game. This one game was just that iconic, like how Super Smash Bros. Melee was for the GameCube, or the second gen of Pokemon was for the Game Boy Color and its ridiculous mini street lamp attachment. So yeah, don't expect an unbiased review this week. Well, all reviews are obviously biased, but you get my point. Super Mario 64 was essentially the Super Mario World equivalent for the N64. It was Nintendo's first game for the system and the best chance to show off the new technology because remember, this was Nintendo's first 3D video game. And yeah, it shows that off spectacularly, and while the art style is unique and iconic, you can't avoid the fact that it looks like they made the game entirely out of building blocks, and they kinda did. Polygons would have been expensive for the console's first entry, especially when they had to be jammed onto a cartridge. Other than that, this was the game that proved right out of the gate what the N64 could offer in terms of new experiences. I mean, on what other system are you gonna be able to feel what it's like to be constantly under attack by a latex-covered octopus? For the love of market research, what was Nintendo thinking in putting out a three-handled controller? Thankfully, Super Mario 64 ended up doing well in spite of the controller's monstrosity, mostly because the controls were intuitive, the layout was easily accessible, and the buttons were perfectly mapped to the actions happening on screen, and that's obviously essential when dealing with a platformer. With the benefit of time in this retro review, we now know how difficult it is to translate gameplay between dimensions, and not everyone made it past that gate. Castlevania and Sonic are the famous examples of being sunk during the transition to 3D, and games like Mega Man Legends showed that while it wasn't abysmal, the series could be best served with a reversal. Super Mario 64 was the flag bearer of 3D gaming and was the argument for every other 3D platformer that followed, and yes, that did include Bubsy 3D, but still, from this success we got games like the Banjo Duology putting Rare's name further on the map for quirky weirdness. And that's not to say that Mario wasn't reinvigorated by the console introduction, since the whole team was on board for this project, and it seems like a couple of the boys from the Super Mario Land side got involved as well, since we get treated to levels like Bob-omb Battlefield, Cool Cool Mountain, and Big Boo's Haunt, along with the iconic tones of Koji Kondo, Nintendo's musical superstar and director, who has produced some of the best soundtracks ever credited to the company. And the premise of the game is exactly as odd as it needed to be, since the idea behind this game's painting worlds is that Bowser has used the Power Stars stolen from the castle to create these worlds as hiding places for the Power Stars under the careful eyes of his lieutenants and some diabolical puzzles. And no moment in the series has ever had the weight that landing in the first star of Bob-omb Battlefield right after getting into the castle and seeing the sprawling playground of a level open for Mario's tinkering around. This is the great fast one that Nintendo was able to pull off with Super Mario 64, since after multiple playthroughs I am no longer to get the most out of this game, since its premier selling point is the exploring of these levels and finding all the secrets. I know every square inch of these maps in and out, so there are unfortunately no surprises to be found for me. However, the fast one that Super Mario 64 pulls is that each map in this game is peculiarly tiny, yet they're crammed with so much content that they all still feel complex and deeply involving to the player as they explore, learn, and solve puzzles to get the stars they need to open the Bowser doors, and eventually find Princess Peach, the person who manages to be held constantly under Bowser's thumb, yet coincidentally is able to get a message to Mario so that he'll rescue her with the second famous cake line in video games. I suppose it makes sense that the enemies in this game are amazingly useless, since most of them could be beaten with one swift heal to the face, since Bowser had to somehow distribute 100 of these power stars to the Koopa troop. So obviously he had to give a couple to his biggest idiots, like that Condor that just flies around shifting Sandland, or to that Manta Ray in Dire Docks. It's like Bowser only came into the castle with his D-listers, since most of his goons spend all their time in Super Mario 64 gormlessly walking around wondering what they're doing with their short lives, between the Goombas, Bob-ombs, Spider Things, Boos, those propeller hat guys, and that peculiar Lakitu in Rainbow Ride that spends his entire life endlessly throwing his spiny children into endless abysses. Most of the game's bosses are similarly moronic, with most of the ones that can talk giving away their weaknesses in the pre-fight monologue. While no one in his military gives even a tiny scrap of a shit about anything, conversely, Bowser has raised the stakes. In Super Mario 64, you have 3 different battles with the Koopa King in 3 starkly different areas. The Dark World, then a land of lava, and finally ending in the sky, for some reason. And each of the Bowser levels are well done, involving challenges that exist as build up to the actual Bowser fight, and between what platforming has to be overcome and a soundtrack so perfect for these levels that Nintendo mined it to death in every sequel, that once you actually make it to Bowser himself, you cannot be anything other than hyped as shit for this, and the boss fights themselves are quite fun, since in the first 2 Bowser isn't actually a threat, and playing Russian roulette with his life is quite enjoyable in a GTA kind of way. But the last one in the sky is that satisfactory challenge that all final bosses needed, since Bowser cuts down the battlefield throughout it, and is given a wide range of effective attacks that caps off the game in the perfect way. Of course, the game's not completely perfect, some levels are completely ridiculous, trivial, and a bunch of stars are hidden behind invisible walls for reasons no one can adequately explain. Yet for what Super Mario 64 has done to further this era's opportunity for innovation and encapsulate the power of the N64, it's all worth it, and to be perfectly fair, even the most ardent objections can't help but be tiny niggles working against one of Nintendo's most solid games ever made. It's got content out the wazoo, unique levels with interesting challenges, iconography that has stood the test of time, and over the N64's lifetime has managed to capture many Game of the Year awards and all-time gaming awards. This is the game that has proved the hype and deserves to remain as one of the best games ever made, and lastly, it proves that at one point, Nintendo had the spark that fans wish it could reclaim at some point in the future. Phew! Well, now that incredibly glurgy review has been published, I will cap this off with a predictable final score. And see you guys next time when we jump ahead a couple years to the next game in the series with a rousing victory for gamers. Join us next time as we jump around on stuff.